Hello everyone, my project report is a literature review on selection and evaluation of sustainable supplier in supply chain. So the question here is, why do we need sustainability in supplier selection after all? Well, businesses these days, they have realized the importance of green and sustainable supply chain because of the increased customer knowledge as well as due to ecological pressures from stakeholders and market. Therefore, in order to increase the business performance and to gain the competitive advantage, sustainability focused supplier selection is an immensely important decision in industrial supply chain. For this, one of the major tasks for any person or organization is the fusion of social, ecological, and economic aspects to maintain sustainability in supply chain. Therefore, it is the need of the hour to explore it more methodologically to incorporate sustainable initiatives in supply chain. So, conventional supplier selection. So, how does the conventional supplier selection works? Well, this is very evident that all the firms in supply chains, they try to maximize their profit. So, based on the researches found recently, it has been found out that the price is the primary criteria considered by most of the industries, whereas the quality is the second one, followed by the delivery time. Therefore, it is highly important to control and monitor the supplier evaluation and selection to direct the company's corporate authority and reputation. So, methodologies and technique in supplier selection towards green and sustainable practices. So, what has been done so far? Well, the researchers have used number of decision approaches to analyze the green and sustainable supply related problems. Also, problem here is that the most of the researchers, they focus on green supplier problems only. Researchers have made use of decision analysis technique to solve this research problem. Also, there is a rising trend for integrated approaches that has been noticed in the past few years. Research gaps and highlights. So, where exactly are they lacking? As it is very evident that supply evaluation process itself has price, quality, and flexibility as number of its conventional criteria. Adding sustainability to it is going to make this whole process even more complex. Also, sustainability criteria might vary from country to country, especially in the developing countries where the customers may not be willing to pay extra for the sustainable products. Moreover, the existing literature does not identify that there should be a proper supplier selection criteria to align with the conventional supplier selection criteria in the hierarchical structures to have sustainability in supply chain. Also, researchers also neglect the social dimensions in the decision making of the supplier selection. So, what are the main objectives of sustainable supplier selection? First of all, to identify and to interpret the evaluation criteria for sustainable supplier selection for a supply chain. Second is to differentiate between the relatively important weights of sustainable selection evaluation criteria for any supply chain. Third is to choose an efficient sustainable supplier from a number of alternatives. So what are the different solution approaches that can be used for to have a sustainable supplier after all? The first one here is AHP, analytical hierarchy process. This is applied for vendor selection. It is most commonly used MCDM technique to evaluate the green supplier decision. However, it would be necessary to integrate AHP with other approaches to address this problem in more efficient and in more flexible manner. The second one here is fuzzy theory. Fuzzy theory is mainly used to solve the problems of uncertain data and vague human judgments, basically the human errors in supply selection. Integrating fuzzy theory along with cluster analysis and MCDM solves the supplier selection problem. Similarly, if we integrate fuzzy with Topsys, it can also be used to evaluate environmental performances of the supplier. However, the problem with these approaches is that they do not take sustainability factors in account while selecting the sustainable supplier itself. So, the next approach we have is DMATL. DMATL is a decision-making trial and evaluation laboratory. This is usually adopted to find the mutual relationship of interdependencies and strength of interdependence between various sustainable factors. The next is TOPSIS. TOPSIS is an abbreviation for the technique for order of preference by similarity to ideal solution. This is mostly adopted to consider all the objective as well as the subjective criteria. In this method, two artificial alternatives known as positive ideal as well as negative ideal, they are basically proposed. The positive ideal solution helps in maximizes the profit and minimizes the cost criteria, whereas the negative ideal solution, it maximizes the cost criteria and then it minimizes the benefit criteria. The last one we have is AHP-Viker. AHP-Viker integrated approach identifies the relevant criteria focusing on the sustainability oriented attributes for supplier selection initiative. Utilize the integrated AHP-Viker framework to scrutinize the sustainable supplier selection criteria. So what is this solution methodology? How does it work? So basically, AHP-Viker approach has been studied to evaluate and to select the sustainable supplier in supply chain. It is the one such decision analysis technique used to prioritize the evaluation criteria of supplier selection. AHP uses the weightages of sustainable supplier selection dimensions and then their respective criteria. These weights obtained through AHP technique are then used to select the most efficient and the most sustainable supplier by employing kaur method. The kaur method helps in selecting the most efficient and the most sustainable supplier from the set of options and choices available in supply chain. So how does AHP works? So it has been given a stepwise manner in this particular slide. So the first step we have is to define the research problem. When we decide after defining that particular research problem, we can use their sustainable supplier evaluation criteria, and then hierarchy based prioritization model is formed. Here the main research problem we have is to assess the sustainable supplier selection criteria in a supply chain, so that sustainable supplier evaluation criteria are then identified and a prioritization model is framed. The next step is to collect the data. First, in order to collect the data, a questionnaire is constructed. For this, decision makers make pairwise contrasts and relations between sustainable selection criteria. Decision dimensions are given under each dimension with a 9-point scale. 9-point scale here is basically giving the likelihood. For example, 9 here is extremely likely, where 1 would be extremely unlikely. Determine the normalized weight for sustainable supply selection criteria dimensions. Then based upon these normalized weight, rank the dimensions and criteria. The next step is to evaluate the consistency of the required solution and to assure the consistency of similar pair comparison. Then a consistency ratio, also known as CR ratio, is calculated in order to determine the consistency as well as the reliability of decision maker. Then we have Vicker approach. So what exactly is a Vicker approach? How do we implement it? The first step here is to assign the rate value to linguistic variables relatively with sustainable supplier alternatives using the linguistic scale that has been given below to get the identical pair of comparison among alternatives and criteria. Then a matrix for alternatives with their criteria is constructed. Develop a decision matrix. Then the accumulated ratings of sustainable supplier are required from expert ratings. Then a decision matrix is formed given the equation here. Now, the next step here is to determine the best FB and the worst FB values from the criteria ratings, where V is equal to 1, 2 till n. So these best FB and worst FB values of all criteria ratings are given below. In next slides, we have step 4, calculating the values of SA and RA, where A is equal to 1, 2 till m. So using these equations, we get the values of S and RA. So SA here is the rate of distance of Ath alternative to positively ideal solution, that is given as the maximum majority group utility, and RA is the individual component regret. Step 5 we have is to determine the final compromise solution QA, where A is equal to 1 till m. Using this following equation, we get the alternative with the minimum QA. So minimum QA here is considered as the best alternative using this particular equation. The solutions obtained with maximum SA, they show the maximum group U majority, and the solution from minimum RA, they show the minimum individual component regret. The weight of the maximum set utility is given by V, therefore the weight is given by 1 minus V. Here the value of V is taken as 0.5. The next step is to rank the alternatives per their QA values, and then we find the least value of QA. So this particular minimum value of Q is the optimal compromise solution when the given two conditions are satisfied at the same time. So what are these conditions? So we have these two conditions here where QA2 minus QA1 is less than 1 over n minus 1. In the next condition is that the alternative QA1 when ranked best in SA and RA is constant and stable in decision making. The last step here we have is to differentiate the best alternatives after selecting AM as the best compromise solution with minimum of QA as per the above mentioned conditions, where the selection alternatives S1, S2, S5 are represented by M. The proposed framework can help managers and decision analysts in the following area. So here we will talk about the benefits of this particular research framework. The first is to understand and to determine the proposed criteria for the selection of a supplier for sustainability. And the next is to determine the corresponding importance weight of the supplier selection criteria. And in the end, to rank the supplier and to select the most competent sustainable supplier among the alternatives. So after this process, so there are still some limitations and some open problems that would be met in the future. So first is that although we have considered 12 major sustainable supplier selection criteria mainly, and they are ranked for this procedure, many of the criteria and dimensions that would be considered are still not identified. So these findings cannot be generalized as the study findings are from one particular case study only. Further, the incoherence in data, the fuzziness in data is also not considered for this approach work because a fuzzy based decision approach might only be applicable in the future work. So therefore, various techniques such as TOPSIS, Mohamadi and MCDM tools such as ISM, TISM and DMATL may be helpful to understand and to analyze the interrelationships between the supplier selection criteria and supply chain and for selecting suppliers towards sustainability in the coming future. So this was my presentation for selecting a sustainable supplier in supply chain. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Have a good day.